We're carrying on a series looking at gospel shorts, is what we've called it. It's not an actual pair of shorts. Somebody cracked that joke. A few people have cracked that joke with me. It's a good joke, but that's enough now with the gospel shorts joke. It's like the gospel in a nutshell, a real conviction that Jesus is the revelation of God, who God is, and even zeroing on a moment in his life as he bumps into somebody, there is something big to see, something incredible to see, and the gospel be revealed. So this week, we're going to delve into this story in Luke 8. Don't panic when I start this anecdote. Don't panic too much when the picture pops up. I grew up watching, especially you, Jude, Flash Gordon. I grew up watching Flash Gordon. And when I say I grew up watching Flash Gordon, I hardly watched anything else. It was literally physically stuck in our video record player when we were young. And me and my brother Dan joke about it like it was years. We know the film like it was there for years. The reality is it was probably only there for a week or two over the summer holidays, which when you're young is like years, isn't it? And often if I bump into my brother Dan, we will just, if you're familiar with the film, you should be familiar with the film, it's an incredible film, we just burst into the script, still all these years later, and my mum looks at us like we've gone crazy or something like that. It's a simple enough story, it's a ridiculously simple plot line. A handsome Flash Gordon, I think he's still around, he still looks pretty much like that, and it's 40 odd years old, this film, or more. Saves the world. In fact, it might even be the universe, which is an incredible thing to save from alien invasion, mostly using American football skills. There are other things that he does as well. Sometimes it's his brawn and his heroic, just general heroicness, but often it's his American football skills. And then he literally flies off into the distance with his childhood sweetheart. The reason I tell you this, for an impressionable, simple young Yorkshireman and his brother with nothing else to do in the day, it made quite an impact on how I viewed a few things. And it set quite a high bar for my expectations of relationships and what sports can reasonably achieve. And that and loads of other stuff I watched, like a lot of these American teen shows that are on the telly, give me a perception, a view of life that I was thankful to be challenged when I was about 13 or 14, and I saw a film, and there were other films that did this, but I watched a film called Brassed Off, if you've seen Brassed Off. It's just this incredibly earthy, gritty, fairly Yorkshire kind of film, and it's got this incredibly big romantic story in it. It's an epic romantic story, but it's like clumsy, and it's awkward, and it's really real. Quite unimpressive, quite normal, quite accidental. And I thought to myself, I think this is the first time that happened, I thought, oh, that's realistic for me. Maybe I could have that. I don't need to look like Flash Gordon to achieve that. Today's gospel short is about faith. And I think it's one we need to see. Personally, I think it's a helpful one for us to see, because it's really easy for us to read a Christian book, perhaps, or to watch sermons or whatever else, or just with our own expectations of what faith should be and get a bit of a Flash Gordon perspective on faith, to have a bit of a Flash Gordon expectation of what faith should be like: unflinching, courageous, move mountains, certain to live happily ever after. And when faith doesn't look quite like that, when it's a flicker, when it's awkward, when it's desperate, we can wonder if we've got faith at all. I think that happens. That happens. Certainly happened to me over the years when I reflect on just how strong a grip I've got on my belief, on my convictions about Christ. I think, is this faith? So now look at this gospel short, gospel in a nutshell. Don't know if the text is up there. Or just think back to how Luke sort of paints this picture. There's not much heroism in this story, I don't think. There's not loads of courage. There's no awesome queen. It is an awesome soundtrack to the Flash Gordon movie. There's no awesome backing track to this story of faith. It's awkward, it's ordinary, it's desperate. You could make a case to say that it's almost even deceptive. Do you know that Luke takes time to say that she crept up at the back of Jesus? It's bordering on superstitious in terms of how we can understand it. A woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, thinking, if I can just grab onto the edge of his coat, if I can just get that far. There's not a lot of heroism there, not a lot of integrity there, you might think. And yet Jesus meets this woman and he says, that's faith. That is faith that saves. That is faith that heals. Faith, I think, if we're going to be aspirational about it, can move mountains. We have those kind of ideas in Scripture. Faith is also hanging on by your coattails. We get that idea in Scripture too. And I think that I think Luke, and I think that God in his wisdom realizes that we need to see both. So I think we're just going to have a slightly different shade, maybe than we're familiar with, of what faith can be. The first thing that struck me about the text was that this woman found faith not in an expected moment. Finding faith was a real interruption for this woman, and I think it can be for us. Do you notice in the story, if you read back just before, this is a story inside of a story. Jesus is on his way to heal Jairus' daughter. It's a moment inside a moment. He's rushing off to Jairus' house because he's heard that Jairus heard his daughter is dying. He's a ruler. He's well known. He's name checked in the Bible. People know around the town who this guy is. And for Jesus and his disciples and the story, time's of the essence. Luke paints what is a bit of a chaotic picture in the text round about it. And Jesus, as you can see in the text, he's been sort of crushed by the crowd. It's not a convenient moment for a chat. And then Luke mentions somebody else. In the middle of this story, which feels like the main story that's happening, the main event of the day, Jesus has got to get to Jairus' daughter. Everybody knows who Jairus is. Get there as quick as you can. That's the story. And then Luke says, a woman who'd had a discharge of blood for 12 years steps into the equation. In that culture, at that time, and let's just stop for a second to get our heads around this idea. That kind of circumstance for this woman, I think this is the right word, it's a contemporary word, would have kind of cancelled her. Would have kind of meant that she wasn't welcome in almost any social setting that you can think of, certainly not a religious social setting. Nobody can help her. The text is careful to say that. She's tried everything, and she's, unlike Jairus, she's not known. She's not named. She's not part of the plan for today. It's not a great time for a chat with Jesus. I'm probably doing a bit of extra thinking here, but at least it strikes me that she's in quite a mess. That's the sort of impression that I get. And Jesus doesn't have a lot of time either, but there she is, there he is, and she's completely healed. What looks on the face of it like a really desperate, awkward, unplanned moment has also got the feel of a set in stone divine appointment when we read it through the eyes of the text. I read a self-help blog over Christmas. I read quite a few over Christmas as it goes. And this blog was kind of about the idea that we will often delay dealing with the big questions of life when we have got things pressing in on us. When there is big things going on, we will always be distracted by the big things. And so often we will say, I'll get round to that other thing when this big thing has been dealt with, when it passes. once the season's over, this season of struggle that I'm going through. When I've got some more headspace, I'll ask myself some of the big questions. I'll think about some of the stuff that I want to get to the bottom of. When everything, this is a phrase that my mum uses all the time, when everything settles down. Sometimes I wonder what on earth she's talking about. When everything settles, let's get settled, when it all settles down, when all of the world events around us get settled down, then we'll start thinking about the big things. And the blog kind of goes on to say, there is a bit of foolishness to this perspective on life, even though lots of us will do it. Because our world, the big world, the world even just in our sphere, very rarely settles down enough for us to think about the big things, the big questions, meaning, change, the God stuff. There's always another pressure. There's always another deadline. There's always a work thing. There's always a worry thing. And we can easily have that mindset. And one of the things this story gently does, I think, is just push back on that. Because for her, faith wasn't getting through the struggle, getting her head together, an orderly process. Faith happened right in the middle of the struggle. It was in the middle of the struggle, out of the blue, when Jesus was there right in front of her in an awkward moment, when she was at the end perhaps of herself, that she saw most clearly what she needed to do. She needed to grab on to Jesus. That was when she found faith. I think often in our story, or maybe in your story, you're waiting for this moment when you've got enough peace to give the big questions of God or meaning or life or your purpose some thought. But actually, that could well be what faith is. But often in Scripture, often in my reality, faith is that moment when you see in Jesus something that you need. You realize that you can't get by without it. It's there, and you make a grab for it. Faith can interrupt. Another thing that faith will do that we see in the story, I think this is a bit more in verse 45 and 46. Faith connects. Faith connects us with God. See there in verse 45. In the middle of all of the chaos, if you can imagine everybody pressing in on Jesus, Jesus trying to get through, that's the sort of picture that's been painted. Jesus asks a pretty weird question, really. As he scrambles through hundreds of people, I don't know, everyone squeezing him around him, he says to his disciples, I think, or certainly in view of his disciples, "Who touched me?" And our favourite character in the Bible story is Peter. It's always Peter who pipes up with an answer, says what everybody thinks. You can almost read between the lines. I always read between the lines, maybe I shouldn't. Are you serious, Jesus? Everybody is pressing in on you. What sort of question is that? Everybody is touching you. Everybody's trying to touch you in this moment. But Jesus is right on it here, and he's onto something, and he doesn't back down with his question. He presses his question. The crowd is pressing in on him, but distinct, this is what Jesus says, distinct from them, Jesus says again, hang on, somebody touched me. And I think part of what's going on here, Luke helps us to see a bit of a distinction in all of these people around Jesus. There's loads of people pressing on him. There's loads of people in proximity, loads of people taking time to get really close enough to physically touch him, physically be there, and yet only one person Jesus pulls out and says, one person has touched me. One person has connected with him on a different level. And Jesus stops because of that. So he's been pressed in, I would imagine, the whole way there. And yet this one event has stopped him in his tracks, because I would say there's something special about that. I'm an occasional word geek. I follow Susie Dent off of Countdown on whatever social media things it is, and she stops and sort of explains words every now and again. And I'm occasional. If I see a really interesting word, I'll delve into it. So now and again, when I'm studying, it's interesting to see what some of the words mean. As I've sort of done a bit of this study, I was listening to another podcast that talks about how the idea of metaphor has empowered people throughout the ages. Certainly when metaphor became a thing, when we started using metaphor as a human species, it added loads of layers to what we could say and what life was. It added more depth of meaning when we could start describing things by actual physical things. And as words grew in depth, this is how the podcast said, as words grew in depth and meaning, so did people grow in depth of meaning. So when you hear somebody say something like, somebody touched me, or I think as what Jesus is saying, that moment touched me, it can mean more, and I think it does with Jesus, mean more than just a physical encounter. When we use language like that moment touched me, that thing happened, we are talking about more than just a physical encounter, and I think that's what's happening with Jesus. The word for touch, dig around into it, kind of has had this idea of to touch in a purposeful way. The commentary that I read had intentional, faith-filled contact in bold and around it. It's the word that's used when Jesus went out of his way and touched lepers, to heal lepers. There's an intention behind the touch. It's not just the physical touch, something deeper is going on. What stopped Jesus wasn't just this woman's grip on the edge of his coat, but that grip, that physical action was sort of synced with her intention, with her heart. It wasn't just a physical touch. That's what stopped Jesus. It wasn't just another physical touch. It was the fact that this physical touch was completely in sync with somebody's heart that was moved for help and crying out for help. And that's what stopped Jesus. It's a good lesson, I think. Important lesson about what faith is. It's not just, and hopefully this is one of those slow burning lessons that can help us all out. It's not just proximity to God. It's not just being close. It's not just like that religious nearness. That's not necessarily what faith is. I think the story gets us to think lots of people are going to press in like that. Lots of people are going to get close to Jesus like that. To have a look, to be curious, to grab an answer, have a shout, say their thing. That's what's happening with the crowd. But not everybody will grab onto Jesus like he is their only hope and surrender, which I think is what's happening with this woman, knowing that they need him. You can imagine her with a trembling hand just holding on to his coattails. And when we have faith that sees our actions synced with the depths of our hearts, the Bible tells us something really encouraging, I think, something really hopeful. That kind of faith will stop God, cause him to look toward us, mean that we can connect with him. A couple more things, faith, about faith that's revealed in this text. Faith also means that our true selves get revealed. I don't think, well, in fact, it seems plainly obvious this woman didn't want to be seen. She didn't want her moment in the spotlight. She didn't want any light being shed on her story at all. Verse 47 and 48 would say that we can see Jesus makes sure she's drawn into the spotlight. She's still scared. Now, she's been healed, but the bleeding has stopped. Luke says in his detail, she comes forward trembling. She's scared about this moment in the spotlight. She didn't want to be seen. She hadn't wanted to be seen for a long time. What she really wanted, I think, was healing, God's power, without any extras, without any relationship. She didn't want to be seen. She wanted no exposure. And as I was ready to sort of push in on that, I kind of thought, well, neither would I. Neither do I, often. I want God's help. I want God's grace. I want God's active healing without me having to tell everybody what's going on in my life. And I'm sure you'd be the same. But Jesus makes sure that she's seen. Do you see how the story takes you down that road? She can't get out of this moment. And part of me, as I see that, thinks, why? Could Jesus not just have lovingly healed her and sent her on her way? Is it a necessary thing to have this moment in the spotlight? Is it a kind thing? This woman's been hiding and been hidden for at least 12 years that we know about. If she slips away now, even if she's healed, she's still going to be in hiding. Wondering if she's stolen something from Jesus, wondering if it's a legit thing that's happened, wondering what on earth has happened. Shame grows in secret, doesn't it? When we keep the secrets, we can never really lose the shame. Healing happens for this woman, but if she slips away now, fear and social exclusion will probably stay. And Jesus is about healing, but he's about healing whole people. So he draws her into the light. And she has this moment that I would imagine would be really unexpected to her, where she finds herself telling her whole story before everybody that's gathered. She went there to be hidden. She went there not to be seen. She didn't want this moment in the light. And yet we find her telling her whole story, the story that has squeezed the life out of her for 12 years. And because she tells this story, because as she meets Jesus, the light of truth is shone on her about exactly who she is, this story that squeezed the life out of her for 12 years has got no power over her anymore. She was healed physically and wholly because she stood in truth. Faith here, in this moment particularly, knowing that God is the healer, is one of the ways that we can understand faith. As we come into that realization, what we see is that faith draws us out into the truth. She's met the healer. She can tell him anything. She wouldn't want to tell anybody else any of this stuff. She might not even want to face it herself, and that she meets the healer, somebody who can heal like that, and she finds herself being able to be honest with herself. Maybe for the first time in 12 years. Honest with other people, perhaps. Which might mean that faith is uncomfy. Because that's what faith does. Faith means that we've got to look at ourselves. Faith means that we've got to be honest with ourselves. But as we see in the text, I would say it's not for the sake of shame. Do you know that way when we face up to stuff, when we look at ourselves, when we admit who we are, when we confess to God, there's that feeling of, oh, crikey, should I have to face up to this? I don't think it's for shame here. It's a difficult truth, but it's not for shame. It's for strength and empowerment. Faith is us being revealed exactly who we are. The last thing that we see in the text. Faith is being named and known by a holy God. Verse 48 says, and it's Jesus speaking, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." This woman's had heartache for most of her recent memory, over a decade. And with one word, daughter, Jesus is able to give her back all of the stuff that she lost over those 12 years. Her identity, her family, access, faith, belonging, future. For 12 years, she's been known for and defined by what's wrong with her condition, and the shame of that. There's like a stigma following her around. And it's brutal, this stigma, when you think about what this woman goes through, because it doesn't just say she's unwell. It does say she's unwell, but it says, worse than being unwell, she's unclean. And worse than being unclean, she's contagious, would be the thought of the day. This woman not only suffers physically, but she suffers because she gets excluded from going almost anywhere. So for 12 years, people kept her away. Can you kind of imagine, we talk about mental health and well-being, and how we are in our heads a lot more these days, don't you? Can you imagine how she was in her head? Can you imagine what being told for 12 years that you're not welcome, that you're not only ill, but we fear that you're contagious, does to you? Can you imagine what kind of words she said about herself? So she carries that shame, and she carries that shame into that moment, and she carries that shame right up to Jesus when she meets him. She's probably got in the back of her mind, I don't want to be seen. Am I going to scare everybody off? Am I going to ruin this moment for everyone? Am I going to be able to draw near to Jesus? Am I going to contaminate him? She's at the place, I think, where she's thinking, not only can Jesus fix me and sort me out, but if he knew what was really wrong with it, would he want me at all? And yet, and this is why faith is a great thing. This is the power of the gospel. This is why we come to church. This is why we've got hope. Because all of the expectation in this moment is that what she has, all of the mindset is, she's unclean. And that uncleanliness will be passed on. So everybody needs to leg it. And she's going to carry on going home in tears for the rest of her life. Yet in this encounter, it stops right there. And it does more than stop. It actually flips round, because Jesus doesn't only not become unclean himself, he makes her clean. He makes her whole. For the first time in 12 years, for this woman, when the truth is told about her, the person telling the truth about her doesn't tell her to clear off, but draws her in. And he does more than that. He does more than just let her stay. He calls her daughter. And when he calls her daughter, it's like he stands with her. You're with me. You're part of my family. All these people idolizing Jesus and wanting to get to him would want to kick this woman right out of town. And yet Jesus looks at her and he's able to say, daughter, you're with me. And in that moment, this woman that has had 12 years of exclusion, Jesus stops in his tracks and stands right next to her where she is. You belong to me. You're not dangerous. You're not contaminated. You're clean. He reverses the flow. For the first time in 12 years, for this woman, the next place that she goes to, for the first time in 12 years, if you can imagine this, the next place she goes to, she won't go in feeling shamed. She won't go in feeling anxious. She won't go in worried that she's going to go home in tears again because of what somebody says about her or how she feels about herself. She'll go into the next place that she goes with a double sense of dignity, a double sense of esteem, a double sense of honor. She'll be completely alive with a different perspective on life. The kind of feeling that you get when you've been healed and fixed and made well. The kind of feeling that you get when the judge says not guilty, when you're completely exonerated. And Jesus says she'll go in peace. She'll go in peace because the faith she had and where she placed that faith. That's, I think, strangle me afterwards if I've got it wrong, the gospel in a nutshell. Sin's got nothing on her. Sin's got nothing on us. Because when we go to him as she did, God reveals the truth about us. The truth is seen. I guess we see it most clearly on the cross. As in everything else, that's my conviction. We realize that on the cross, we don't come on our own in all of this mess. We see somebody in God who's willing to stand with us. And on the cross, we see him stand with us, die with us, and say, shout out, in a sense, these are mine. I know they're doing unforgivable things, but forgive them. These are mine. So that when we go to places, we don't carry shame anymore, but life. Having said all of that, I still love Flash Gordon. I will always love Flash Gordon, and you should all watch it. And I would like Flash Gordon-like faith. I would. I want my awesome acts of kindness to have a Queen soundtrack. That's what I would like. When I do something good, I want to hear the angels singing in the back of my head, some sort of Queen song to endorse in me this sort of heroic faithfulness. That's what, I don't think I'm ever going to get away from that. I want to be unflinching in the face of hardship. Truth is, I can only ever pretend to be that. I always flinch in the face of hardship. I want to live out my faith life like heaven comes as a complete certainty all the days of my life, and I jump on a rocket cycle, which is what Flash Gordon has, disappear off into the sunset with my sweetheart. That kind of thing. There's worse things to want. It's not a bad aim. But know this, in all of that, if that's not your faith story, because it ain't mine. If what you have is a trembling hand, if you're hanging on to the coattails, if you're back to him again just because you're not well, just because you're worried, just because you've read a good devotion, just because you need some help, so long as it's him, so long as it's Jesus revealing God to you, it's faith. And he will say to you, go in peace.